Our first guest tonight, I am so honored to have on. Robert W. Sullivan is a philosopher, historian, jurist, theologian, and author. He earned his BA in history in 1995. Robert spent his entire junior year of college from 92 to 93 abroad at St. Catherine's College, Oxford University, England, studying European history and philosophy. While in Oxford, Mr. Sullivan was a member of the Oxford Union and Oxford University Conservative Association and the Oxford Law Society. Upon returning to the U.S. in June of 93, he took a year off from Gettysburg College to serve as office director of Washington International Studies Council, located on Capitol Hill. Prior to attending law school in the United States, he spent a term in 1995 at Trinity College, Oxford University, studying jurisprudence. I think that's how you pronounce that, but I'll ask him to make sure I said it right, and international law. From 97 to 2000, he attended Widener University School of Law, Delaware, from where he received his Juris Doctorate. He was admitted to the State Bar of Maryland in 2000, as well as the District of Columbia in 2002. Mr. Sullivan spent 2001 to 2008 working at various law firms in the Baltimore area, practicing primarily in the area of insurance defense. Robert is a Freemason, having joined Amicable St. John's Lodge number 25 in Baltimore, Maryland in 97. He became a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason in 99, Valley of Baltimore, Orient of Maryland. His two books, The Royal Ark of Enoch, The Impact of Masonic Ritual, Philosophy, and Symbolism, in 2012 was his first published work, being the product of 20 years of research. In 2014, Robert published his second book called Cinema Symbolism, A Guide to Esoteric Imagery and Popular Movies. He resides in the Baltimore area. Without any further delay, let's get him on the program. Robert, good evening. Welcome to Fringe Radio Show and AM 630, my friend.
Hey, Pat, thanks for having me on tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on. Much appreciated.
Well, I'm looking. I want to learn a lot from you tonight, Bob, because I myself, I will be honest with you. I'm not going to tell you stories. I have been interested in Freemasonry, and you know, there's so many subjects that we cover on the program, and that is one I have not even scratched the surface on. So I would like to get educated, and I've got a lot of questions, and you sent me a lot of talking points. We got a lot of fun stuff to talk tonight, and we're going to educate the audience without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything you want to ask me about it, it's fine with me, and I'll do my best to answer it. And certainly, some things I can't talk about, but
sure.
I think the bulk of it, the most important stuff, is certainly fair game, and I discuss it in the book at length. So ask me anything you want to.
Well, I did. I just barely scratched the surface on your bio, but maybe you can tell our listeners, give a little backstory. How did you get interested in what you do in deciding to pursue a law career, and maybe some of the things you talk about, and then we'll get into the meat of your books and have some fun, and again, definitely get educated.
The book really began for me. Back when I was an associate student at Oxford, this would have been 92, 93.
Mm-hmm.
Just briefly, when I was over there, I got introduced to sort of what you would call the Hermetic tradition and its influence upon, society in general, the occult, things like that. And certainly secret societies were a large part of this. And it was just a fascinating subject that I enjoyed researching and learning about. I was studying history. This was something kind of I was doing on the side, although they do interweave.
Right.
I got back to Gettysburg. I graduated, and after I graduated Gettysburg, before I went to law school, I was afforded the opportunity to join the local Masonic Lodge here in Baltimore. And I took the opportunity, and then I went away to law school and got done with that. And while I was still at law school, I joined the Scottish Rite. Here in Baltimore, that's 4 degrees 4 through 32, and it was really just researching, writing, and was planning a book, and I started posting. With the advent of social media, the first page I had was an old MySpace page, and I started posting photo galleries and blogs and things like that, just with some of the contents of the Royal Arch of Enoch book, some of the research I had been doing, things like that, and it was very popular. And a fellow friend of mine who was a Freemason saw the page and said, "Hey, listen, instead of writing blogs, why don't you write a book?" Like you see in a cartoon, the little light bulb went off over my head, and this journey began for me back in 1992. The Royal Arch of Enoch, 20 years of writing and research, was published in 2012. For lack of a better word, I turned that 20 years on Hollywood, which turned out my second book, Cinema Symbolism.
Very interesting. You're being a historian. I love history. I love digging into the depths of things and kind of turning things upside down. Never studied that in college. I'm an IT guy by trade, Bob, but had to be interesting taking some of those subjects up.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a history major at college. I never matriculated at Oxford. I was just there as an associate student. My alma mater was Gettysburg College, and I certainly enjoyed my time there. But what really fascinated me when I went to England was hearing names of people, these really big movers and shakers in history that seemed to be kind of like written off our history books. And even in America, some of these guys have been left off of our history pages regarding even American history.
Right.
So that interested me. I didn't see it as a grand conspiracy or anything. I mean, there's only so much you can learn in 4 years. But I was just fascinated by a lot of these names that kind of get lost. In the shuffle when you're studying history at university. You really don't have time to go into it. But yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating subject. It's something I'm very interested in, and certainly, kind of just to get back to your first question, being a lawyer also helps. Kind of seeing both sides of it, and seeing both sides, and what argument's more persuasive than the other. And certainly when it comes to Freemasonry, because there's a lot of bogus information out there, and trying to decipher out what was good, what was bad. And certainly, most importantly, being a Freemason, I can certainly tell you and the listeners that neither book would exist but for my Masonic membership, going through the rituals and understanding them symbolically. And certainly what they were trying to convey on an esoteric level was very important to both books.
Well, and being sometimes just learning how to, like you said, is being an attorney, you have to look at both sides. But I think that in general, I think a lot of times people for so long, and now with, the advent of the internet, which has been here a long time, but with more and more people digging into things, I think we took a lot of stuff years ago, historical things that went on as fact and as gospel, and now. Again, we're able to kind of start really digging in, and people are getting, they're taking different perspectives on things. They're digging in deeper, tearing things apart, connecting dotted lines and stuff, and we're finding more and more stuff. And sometimes while we may read about a historical act or date or whatever, or person, whatever that may be, but sometimes when you dig into the nitty-gritty of it, there's so much more beneath the surface that you've never heard of or seen before.
Oh, no question about it. No question about it. One of the things that I take on in the Royal Arch of Enoch book, and even became, and this just goes to show you changing times. When I joined the Masonic Lodge here back in 1997, and this has changed. I mean, this has completely changed. I mean, this has been much more well accepted now than it was back then. But sort of any talk. Of sort of, Masonic architecture or a Masonic city design, certainly what you will find in Washington, D.C., this was almost scoffed at. This is just, coincidence, nothing like this. I mean, but if you begin to research it, and again, it's nothing sinister. I mean, you begin investigating sacred geometry, symbolism. You will find this all over Washington, D.C. And like I said, being a lawyer, and this goes for the movies as well. Seeing the symbolism in movies, you dig this and you see the same things going on over and over and over again. You realize you are well beyond coincidence, and you are definitely dealing with an intelligent and active mind behind this symbolism, this design, this architecture. In places like Washington, D.C., and Baltimore, Maryland, where I am. And again, it kind of ties into the movie symbolism. People have asked me before, is this a coincidence? No. I mean, if you were seeing it once or twice, okay. But when you see these same things being repeated over and over again, it's information that as a judge or jury, as a lawyer, I would have no problem presenting to a judge or jury.
Well, and what I'd like to do, I mean, we've got a couple hours here tonight. I'd like to definitely get some examples out there for our listeners too, and have you talk through some things. With Freemasonry, okay, I'm going to be honest with you, Bob. I'm very ignorant on this subject. I will tell you what I know about Freemasonry is when I was a young kid growing up in the Masons and the Masonic Lodge, the whole gamut. When I was a young kid growing up in Chicago, we had a summer home up in Michigan, and once a month at the Masonic Lodge, they had a pancake breakfast, and they were the nicest people in the world. And that is honestly where my knowledge starts and stops about the Masons. Could you give if you will, for people that don't know, and I'm one of those people. I have, I like to research things, but I like to also hear about it from people that are involved with it. Could you kind of give us a little bit of an overview of what this is all about and how it all comes together and how you were, how this affects your daily life, if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly what you said is certainly part of it, and Masonry has gone through many changes over the years, and it can be, it's some of it is completely subjective. And I really mean that. Masonry can mean one thing to one Freemason and something else to someone else. Masonry, as it exists today, its appearance on what you would call mainstream history is its official beginnings are on June 24th, 1717. That is when Freemasonry proper comes onto the history pages. It is founded in London, England. Several lodges come together, and Freemasonry as a modern-day official organization is born. It existed prior to that as stone-cutting guilds. Some tie it to the Knights Templar. It existed in Scotland. Craft guilds existed in Europe. This is irrefutable. I do not deny this. But Masonry proper is officially born on June 24th, 1717. This is what you call the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry, what is called the Blue Lodge. And the degrees are of entered apprentice, fellowcraft, and master mason. Once you get done the 3rd degree and have passed catechisms on all 3 degrees, you then can hold yourself out as a Freemason. The high degree systems of Freemasonry come later, and that's a little more interesting. What you will find is that Masonry interweaves so many esoteric and political philosophies. We could not even begin to even cover all this in tonight.
Sure.
When you get into the rituals, of the Blue Lodge, especially the 3rd degree ritual, you are dealing with a lot of solar symbolism, a lot of esoteric imagery. It is the degree is a retelling of what is best described as the dying and resurrected Egyptian sun god. Is what is played out. It is done under a different name. The candidate portrays the architect of Solomon's temple named Hiram Abiff. Hiram is killed and resurrected, and this is paralleling the idea of the death and resurrection of the sun, namely this Egyptian sun god known as Osiris. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of solar imagery. It is very well concealed. It is not necessarily explained to you. When you get done this, and this certainly in the United States, then once you become the 3rd degree, you have the option, and it's completely up to you, of entering one of 2 high degree bodies. You can enter one, you can enter both, you can enter neither. It is completely up to you. And these are called the York Rite and the Scottish Rite. And these 2 high-degree systems are essentially born out of a high-degree body coming out of Paris, France, in the 1740s called the Rite of Perfection. And this is the main thesis of the Royal Arch of Enoch book, was that this high-degree, this was one particular high-degree ceremonial in this Rite of Perfection called the Royal Arch of Enoch, is incorporating elements of the Lost Book of Enoch, or 1 Enoch, which technically shouldn't be happening. 1 Enoch, the Book of Enoch, is lost to Western civilization from around the 2nd, 3rd century all the way up until 1773, when a man named James Bruce returns to Europe with a couple copies. And even then, they're not even translated into English until 1821. Yet this high-degree ceremonial called the Royal Arch of Enoch, named after the biblical patriarch, is incorporating elements of this Lost Book of Enoch. when you do the research on this and you understand what's going on inside the Blue Lodge ritual and in this high-degree ceremonial, you will realize this is one of the most important degrees of all Freemasonry. You could even cast the argument that it's the highest degree of Freemasonry, probably the most important degree in Freemasonry from a symbolic and philosophical standpoint. And that was the thesis of the Royal Arch of Enoch book. And Freemasonry incorporates a lot of esoteric imagery. When it's born in England, it is incorporating a lot of political imagery. The high-degree system also echoes this, but for different reasons. And you have a lot of very competing philosophical and political thought in Blue Lodge Freemasonry and the high degrees. I certainly can get into it if you want me to, but it is an incredibly long story that I document much more in the book. But Freemasonry undergoes a lot of changes over the years, and one of the other main talking points of the Royal Arch of Enoch book was how Masonry, both the Blue Lodge and the high degree system, specifically this Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial, was being used to cultivate and develop the United States of America. Both, philosophically, politically, socially. You'll find it in the architecture, you'll find it in the constructs of government. And again, this was the main, thesis of the Royal Arch of Enoch book. Freemasonry can mean a lot. You could ask a Freemason what it means to them, and you could get the answer, hey, it's just a bingo night, and a Friday night dinner or something like that. You talk to someone like me about it, you will find, to me, it's really this container, this modern day, what I would call mystery school, that is carrying on these ancient mysteries from Egypt, Babylon, the Templars, the Rosicrucians, things of that nature, that is really sort of this vestige, this Western Hermetic mystery school that is continuing on these lost esoteric traditions.
Interesting. Well, one thing, Bob, that I've noticed is that so many people, so many Americans, I'm not saying that people in general aren't very well educated. People aren't, how can I put this? People tend to be very educated about present time, present day. But I think when you talk to the average American and you talk about history, it starts some 200 years ago. But there's so much more to it that started way before that, before this country was even born and before it started to, get put together. As far as its history and how things move forward and how the political system's formed. There was a lot more to that before it all started here, before everything started here on day one.
Oh, I don't disagree with that, and I think that part of my motivation for writing the Royal Arch of Enoch book was to bring to light and bring back to life this sort of lost occult history of the United States. And it really is amazing. It's a fascinating study. When you get into the Masonic influence upon the United States, the high degree ceremonial, you get into the architecture of Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland has some of this. You'll find it in, some of the seals and logos of college universities, the Erie Canal, which was a Masonic construction project. It is fascinating, and it was, to me, part of the motivation for writing the Royal Arch book was to bring back and to shed light on this lost sort of Masonic history of the United States. That and you are completely correct. A lot of people's knowledge of the United States is very limited. We live in a fast-paced, social media world. If it can't be digested in 5 seconds, it gets shrugged aside. And part of my reasoning for writing the Royal Arch of Enoch and to lay it out and detail it as much as it is was to bring back this and to inform people of this lost sort of Masonic history of the United States, which is definitely there. It is clearly present. A lot of people frown upon it because they see it as conspiratorial. And to be honest, it is to a little bit. It is to a degree. And as a Freemason, I can say that. But it's not the dark, evil overarching conspiracy that a lot of people make it out to be. And it probably doesn't even really, the Masonic influence in the United States was really undercut in the 1820s. Masonry survived it, but a lot of its political and philosophical influence gets cut out from underneath of it. But it still survives. but certainly at the founding of this country in its early days, in the construct and the architecture, you will find a very decidedly heavy Masonic influence. And again, this was part of my motivation of writing the Royal Arch of Enoch, was to bring this back to life, to shed light on this lost, yet legitimate Masonic history of the United States.
Are there any, like with, I don't want to put, Freemasonry into a religious category, because am I right or wrong? It's not a religion of any sort. It may be a religion of science, but I mean, it's not a religion of sorts, is it, Bob?
Not really. This trips a lot of people up. Freemasonry is in order to join Masonry, okay, you have to believe in a supreme being. You have to believe in a God figure. You cannot be agnostic and you cannot be atheist. If you're either of those, you cannot join. Freemasonry is deist, which means you have to believe in a supreme being. Whatever your path to get to that God is, whether it's Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, that's left up to the individual Mason. So it's not, what's religion? Religion is basically beliefs or, I dare say, superstitions about the personality of God. As long as you believe in God, that's fine. But whatever, you believe about this God, that's left up to you. That's really the best way I can describe it. So Masonry is deist. It's really not a religion.
Right.
It's a belief in a supreme being. The religious part is left up to the individual Mason.
And I would assume that what you learn or what you study is, again, and we'll talk about some of these things, but some of these topics, some of these things, like you talk about. Your book addresses the real-life Da Vinci Code and National Treasure, and some of these, I don't want to call them fringy things, but things that are a little out of the norm. You kind of engulf that, envelop that. You kind of pull that in and take a look at everything.
Yeah, I mean, I just used the Da Vinci Code and the National Treasure movie just as a talking point, really.
Right.
But it was really presenting this historical anomaly that was going on. This high degree ceremonial. It's an incredibly important ritual, this Royal Arch of Enoch, because it's the recovery of what is lost in the Blue Lodge. In the Blue Lodge ritual, the Hiram Abiff figure has this secret word. It's the name of God. He gets killed. The word is lost, but the word, the name of God, is recovered in this Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial, which is, again, incorporating components of the lost Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is lost from around the 2nd, 3rd century up until essentially 1821. I present what the tip-off of this is a book written by a man named B.E. Jones. The B stands for Bernard. Bernard Jones. He wrote a book called The Freemason's Guide to the Royal Arch, or I believe it's called The Freemason's Compendium to the Royal Arch. One of those two names escapes me right now. But at the very beginning of this book, Jones talks about this lecture that was given by a Freemason named A.E. Waite in London, and Waite was talking about how this Royal Arch ceremonial was a complete retelling of the Book of Enoch. Jones just stops right there, and I can only assume that Jones wasn't aware that at the time of this ritual's construction, the Book of Enoch was lost. The rest of Jones's book talks about the different variations in the Royal Arch of Enoch ritual, shows some of the, about the ritual garb, the medals, the medallions, how the ritual, differs in England and France and the United States, things like that. He seemed to have not realized that when the ritual was being constructed, the Book of Enoch wasn't known to history. And this was a tip-off for me, and I began researching it. The book, The Royal Arch of Enoch, The Impact of Masonic Ritual Philosophy in Enoch, sort of documents this ritual and how it is incorporating this elements and components of the Lost Book of Enoch. And then I go further and say, why it's so important. But I get into also, and you can ask me about this, certainly, the Blue Lodge and, the symbolic philosophies, what's going on in the Blue Lodge, how it ties in, and why it's also important. I never really saw it as conspiracy or anything like that. I really kind of described it as pointing out a historical anomaly.
Right.
And you can get into where did this Book of Enoch come from? If there was a lost copy out there, I certainly can present evidence as to where it could have come from, where this influence came from. And I think it's legitimate research that I get into.
I guess what I was stemming back to is when we talked about, Freemasonry as a religion. Do Freemasons, Bob, does your group have a kind of, I don't want to say like a Bible, but do you have books reference books or guides that you follow as far as I don't want to say rules and regulations, but that give you as a Freemason and others as Freemasons kind of a guide, kind of a path?
Oh, sure. There are numerous Masonic monitors that have been written over the years, Masonic encyclopedias that provide instruction, that provide history, that provide insight. Masonic monitors, Thomas Smith Webb wrote a very famous one. William Preston wrote another. You have Masonic encyclopedias by Albert Mackey, books about comparative religion and Freemasonry by Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. Yes, I mean, and there have been numerous books written over the years about Masonic philosophy, bylaws of the lodge. Right after Masonry is founded in 1717, a few years later, a man named James Anderson writes the Constitutions of the Freemasons, which lays out its bylaws and its guidelines. And it is, what one of them is, in order to become a Mason, a person has to believe in a supreme being. But Masonry will not adopt any specific religion. And of course, in the United States, this becomes the separation of church and state. So, yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. There are Masonic bylaws. There are guidelines. In a Masonic lodge, you will find an altar with a Bible sitting on it that a Mason takes, it's his oath upon. I've never experienced this, but I've read that if a man is a Muslim and becoming a Mason, the Bible will be substituted with a Quran, or if the man is a Hindu, it could be the Vedas. I have never experienced this. I've only read about it. But no, there are numerous Masonic monitors, Masonic literature that provide instruction to Freemasons about its origins and its philosophies. No doubt about it.
I didn't know that. I mean, again, these are things I'm just learning tonight, and maybe others are too. I think that being able to come into this organization, family, whatever you want to call it, and carry your own beliefs forward, as far as your religious beliefs, I think that's a good thing. I think it's something that is not being dictated to you or told what to do. You come in with your own beliefs and you start. I would assume that's your starting point, and you go from there and you build and improve yourself and your life and your knowledge from that.
Well, that's just about it. I think that's a pretty good summation of it. There is no specific, I would say, religious theme to it. There is invoking of of God. In Masonry, the God is usually referred to as the great architect or the grand geometrician, of the universe. But it's sort of it's deism is really the best way I can describe it. And it will not intrude upon whatever your individual religious beliefs are. That's left completely up to you.
And that's important because, again, being told what to believe in and not believe in, We're going to take a quick... All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Robert Sullivan is our guest tonight. Again, Bob, thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday night to be here with us.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me on Fringe Radio. It's great to be here, and certainly enjoying the talk so far. It's a pleasure to be here.
When you join the Masonic Order or Masonic Lodge, when a person is new to it, now you've been involved with it for many, many, many years. Obviously, there are many degrees. You've moved way up through the chain. What does it take to I would assume the move up is just your furthering of your knowledge and what you've. I don't know how it works. How do you move up in being a Mason? How do you move up into the organization, or how do you move up through that?
Right. That's a two-pronged answer. Well, one is when you join the Blue Lodge, the way it works is you take the ritual, you go through the ritual. In order to ascend or progress to the next degree, you have to pass a catechism, which is a set of predetermined answers and questions about what you've learned. Once you pass that, then you get the next degree, and once you pass that, then you get the third degree, and then that ends it. Then you're a Freemason. In my lodge, you actually have to take a third-degree catechism. Some lodges do this as well, and until you pass the catechism, you can't hold yourself out as a Freemason. That's traditionally the way it's supposed to be, but some lodges vary on this. Once you become a Freemason, you have several. There are other Masonic bodies you can join. But the two premier ones in the United States are the York Rite and the Scottish Rite. And like I said, they're completely voluntary. No one will force you into doing them. You can do both. You can do neither. It's completely up to you. What the high degrees sort of do is they continue the story, and they're very philosophically rich. They have a deep tradition. They kind of go against some of the philosophies of the Blue Lodge, but if you understand where these rituals are coming from, that's no surprise. You have different sort of themes going on in the high degree bodies. It's unique in the York Rite. We talked about earlier about how Masonry was deist. If you join the York Rite of Freemasonry, the end-all body of the York Rite is the Knights Templar, and in order to join them, you actually do have to profess a religion. That is only open to Christian Freemasons. If you are Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist or deist, you cannot join the Templars. That is only open to Christian Freemasons. So that distinguishes itself uniquely within Freemasonry. And yeah, I mean, as you move up, you go through the degrees. Really, once you decide to go through the high degrees, you can just progress through. There's nothing really, nothing will hold you back between the 4th and 5th degrees of the Scottish Rite. You just go through all the degrees. You end up at the 32nd. And that's as far as you can go. There is a 33rd degree in the Scottish Rite. That's completely honorary. But I would just caveat the answer with within the York Rite and the Scottish Rite, it's really this Royal Arch ritual. It's the 7th degree in the York Rite. It's the 13th in the Scottish Rite. That is really sort of the end-all, be-all of the Masonic story. It is the discovery of what is lost in the Blue Lodge. And certainly, arguably, the most important degree within all of Freemasonry. I'll wrap up on this. That's just the degree system. If you actually want to get involved in the governance of the lodge, and you want to move up through that, I mean, because that's important too. But again, this is completely voluntary. The way that works is it's called working the chairs. You start as the lowest officer in the lodge. You do it for a year, and then you progress up. So you basically start as you start as like the junior deacon, then you go to the senior deacon, then you go to the wardens, and you ultimately wind up as what is called the worshipful master. That's the title given to the Mason who runs his lodge for a year. Once the worshipful master steps down, a new worshipful master comes in. The worshipful master that is retiring or that is retired is what is called a past master, then you can hold yourself out as a past master. I had several grandfathers in my family tree who were past masters. So when you actually have the degree system, and then you have the governance of the lodge that you can move up in as well. And if you become a worshipful master and past master, then you can even open yourself up to even more important positions, such as Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge, things like that. But again, these positions are voluntary and completely up to you.
And obviously, a lot of time and effort has to be put into this. I mean, if you, I've had some friends in the past whose fathers have been Masons, and they say, it's a lifestyle, it's a way of life, and I would assume that is when people are putting in tons of effort it can be a major commitment.
Oh, no question, especially when you get into the governance of the lodge, that is a major commitment. I actually started as the junior. I started as a junior deacon. I did it for a year, but I had to stop. I couldn't go any further at the time. My law career was beginning, and I just could not commit any time to it. And then on top of it, just studying the symbolisms of the rituals and the philosophies for putting this book together, it was just too overwhelming. So yeah, I kind of dropped out of the lodge governance. I'm still a Blue Lodge Mason. I maintain all my memberships, of course. But no, I've never gotten involved in governance of the Blue Lodge. It really is. I totally agree with you. It's a lifetime. It's a complete time commitment. And I took the time really kind of to write the book, I suppose, about the rituals rather than actually going through. I couldn't possibly have done both. There's just not enough hours in the day.
Right. Well, and the thing is I would assume that in part of this is a journey, if you will, and in part of your journey through this lifestyle, writing the book to educate others and bring out more details and again, just about educating people is a whole part of it too.
Yeah, I mean, Masons are encouraged to build things and to be active in the community, and that's sort of the way I saw it as well. I don't disagree with that. Is writing the book you're building something, and I thought that writing the book was certainly going to provide a lot of insights and light to both Masons and non-Masons, and try to dispel some of the conspiracy and some of the negativity, but to be honest, and talk about the influence. And how influential Masonry has been, especially in the United States. I didn't want to, just go into it with. I wrote the book objectively, and just to, to say, hey, they're really, like I said, I've been exposed to a lot of Masons who will say, oh, it's a coincidence. That's a coincidence. Believe me, when you start breaking this stuff down and you get into the architecture and the Erie Canal and Washington, D.C., and just a lot of the symbolism going on there. You are well beyond coincidence. So I wanted to, talk about this very heavy Masonic influence, and I wanted to, make the book available and write it in a way that would be understandable to both non-Masons and Masons alike.
Some questions have come in for you, Bob. You want to take a few?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's hear them.
One of our good listeners in Ohio, in the Pittsburgh area, writes in and says, Robert, historically, has it always been men in the Freemasons? What is the ratio now in terms of men and women?
It's 100% to 0. Women are forbidden to become Freemasons. That's a big no-no. Women cannot become Freemasons. The rituals of Freemasonry are solar-based, are based on the sun. The sun in all the mystery traditions is the masculine. The moon is the feminine. And because you have solar rituals, only men can join. And this again ties into some of the Egyptian symbolism going on in the Blue Lodge as well, with the idea of the resurrected sun. The mother of the sun is Isis. And she only births solar men. She only births solar children. She doesn't birth lunar children or daughters. There are only sons of. You may have heard the term "sons of the widow."
Yes.
Yeah. The widow that they're talking about is Isis, who is widowed upon the death of Osiris, and she resurrects Osiris to conceive his solar stand-in named Horus, and of course Horus is a solar avatar. But Isis never births the moon. She only births the sun. And this ties into why women cannot become Freemasons. There are Masonic auxiliary organizations for women. The primary one is the Eastern Star. There are other, when you get into these masculine male secret societies, other ones that come to mind are like the Odd Fellows. There's a women's body for that as well. They're called the Rebeccas. Those are the female Odd Fellows. The Eastern Star is a Masonic organization open to women, but if you are a woman and you join the Eastern Star, you cannot hold yourself out as a Freemason. Only men can become Freemasons. It's been that way since its inception, and again, it ties into a lot of the symbolic rituals the symbolism associated with the rituals is for that.
But obviously, there are things that your spouse, your wife, can do to support you and be involved in some ways.
Oh yes, I mean, and certainly the Masonic lodges are not completely inclusive. I mean, my goodness, they have family nights, they have ceremony, or events at the lodge that are open to families. To be honest with you, it's usually the only thing that's done behind closed doors. Where only lodge members can attend our ritual-related or business meetings. But no, the lodge has, many family events where family members can come, non-Masons can come and participate. And certainly there are organizations associated with Masonry for women. Like I said, the Eastern Star, the Rebeccas for the Oddfellows. I'm in the Scottish Rite. I think there's the Daughters of the Nile. I think are the Scottish Rite. Is the or maybe that's the Shriners. I can't recall. But there's a Scottish Rite Shriners organization for women as well. So no, it's just within Masonry. It's all men, and it revolves around the solar symbolism of the rituals.
Gotcha. Carl writes in, says, Robert, can you talk a little bit about the Masonic symbol in general and what it means?
Oh, well, there's several Masonic symbols.
He's talking about I think the one most people are familiar with, the
right, the square and compasses.
Right.
Yeah, the square and compasses with the letter G. It's the idea behind that is there are symbols of construction, and in Masonry they're used to teach morality, to square your actions, and things like that. They also have. The letter G is generally thought to either stand for God or geometry. There is the most important symbol within Freemasonry is the sun. I talk about that more in the book. I mean, even the Blue Lodge is laid out upon the movement of the sun, where you have the worshipful master in the east as the rising sun, the senior warden in the south as the sun and meridian, and the junior warden in the south and the senior warden in the west as the setting sun. So the sun is really the most important symbol within Freemasonry. The square and compasses actually tie into this, and the angle that the square and compasses are set upon. And if you serve as a worshipful master and become an allegorical sun, when you step down, the emblem that you wear, the compasses are actually set at a different degree, angle, and it actually revolves around the movement of the sun. So the square and compasses, believe it or not, are actually a solar allegory. But generally, I guess what you would call exoterically, they're working tools of stone building, of construction, and within Masonry they are used to teach. They are part of a system of morality, and working tools are used to teach morality within the Blue Lodge, in a nutshell.
Very interesting. So I've seen the symbol for so many years and didn't know.
Yeah, the symbol actually changes. Believe it or not, and the symbol you're seeing is the square and compasses. If you pay attention to it, and the reason everyone knows this is if you pay attention to the actual symbol, the compasses actually sit on top of the square. When you join the lodge and the symbol of an entered apprentice, the compasses actually sit behind the square. Then when you become the fellow craft, one point sits on top the compasses, and then finally when you become a master mason, the 2 points sit on top the sit on top the compasses. So when you become the master mason, the final, everyone knows the symbol. It's the compasses sitting on top the square.
One thing that I've noticed looking at the symbols is the compass, the point, where it joins the two legs together. I've seen some depictions where it appears like it's like a screw head. Other ones like it's an eyeball. Other ones it looks like a symbol of some sort. Does that have some significance as far as that piece, the topmost piece?
No, not really. I've seen it as well, just a little bevel there or something. I've seen in the middle. It's in America. It's usually the letter G. Like I said, for God or geometry. I've seen that little piece as well. Sometimes, it's really more the centerpiece. It's the letter G. can be the all-seeing eye, and on the past master's jewel, it's the sun. That's really what you want to look for.
Interesting. Again, just looking through it, doing a little bit of studying today before we went on the air. I was going through
Sure.
it, and again, so much out there, so much to learn about these different. I know, again, conspiracy theorists feel it's some sort of a secret society, and I think that's always when there's the unknown. It's a secret society.
Well, it is. It is really. It's really. I mean, I guess if it was technically a secret society, we would never have heard of it. It's really more of a society with secrets. But it's one of those things where the best way for me to describe it is the secrets are sort of it's there, but you've got to connect the dots and you've got to piece it together. And the information is really scattered all over the place. And again, this was one of my motivations for writing the Royal Arch of Enoch book, was to connect the dots and to create this massive compendium to gather, you know, the Albert Pikes and the Manly Halls and the Albert Mackeys, you know, and condense the material into one volume. That was part of my motivation as well, is kind of create a go-to guide for Masonry for both the Blue Lodge and the high degrees, right, which was again, part of my motivation for writing the Royal Arch. I wanted to write a definitive book on Freemasonry, the go-to guide for it, and that was again part of my motivation for writing the Royal Arch book.
Gotcha.